So I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening, which is Mark Duffell, a passionate botanist and horticulturalist who has an exceptional breadth of knowledge of our flora. He is recognised by the BSBI as one of our gold standard recorders for the Field Identification Skills Certificates, FISCs. Mark works closely with the BSBI. He's on our committee for England. He's a referee for non-native shrubs, and he has helped develop and promote FISCs through being a member of our FISC working group. He's also an experienced tutor, both in the classroom and out in the field. It is my delight to now hand over to Mark for our talk this evening, Leylandii and their lookalikes.
Thank you for that, James. Okay, screen should hopefully be sharing. Right, so tonight's talk is on Leylandii and their lookalikes, those sort of scaly leaved conifers that leave some of us a bit terrified to identify them. So it's a group of conifers that probably many of us also ignore as well. So beyond sort of the hedgelines, this is the headlines even, the classic thought of Leylandii is these huge monolithic sort of trees that block out views and cause untold damage to neighbours and houses and relationships and whatever. So, but there's, excuse me, a lot more going on than just that. And actually, Leylandii, looked up close, is a pretty attractive tree. So we'll cover tonight the identification challenges that come with this group. We'll look a little bit at their taxonomy and nomenclature. That's actually quite a tricky area. We'll look at key identification features. We'll look at separating the major genera, an overview of the commonest species and hybrids within the British and Irish flora, and then a short section on identification resources. Now, some slides, because there's a time constraint, some slides I may show and not talk to, so I'll make sure the content's there and you can go back and pause the video and watch it later if my time runs out. So what identification challenges are there? Well, for a start, I find that conifers elicit very little excitement in many field botanists. They just go, oh, a conifer, and especially if it's a Leylandii, Lawson Cypress group, they, again, give it little excitement to see. So if you start looking and digging around in the data, you'll find like the BSBI plant atlas that was published a year or so ago. They account for eastern Red-Cedar Thuja occidentalis. It comments it's been widely planted, but is almost certainly still under-recorded. And the majority of conifers are not native. There's a native member of the Cypress family, but otherwise there's only two other natives. We've got the so that was juniper I was talking about. We've also got yew, and we've also got Scots pine. You could argue that Leylandii is a native tree. It was hybridized and formed actually in Wales, just over the border from Shropshire, where you can go and see one of the parent trees. So the nomenclature can be very confusing at times. The names have jumped back and forth, and I remember learning these in the mid-90s, and I had an idea of what the names are, and then they switched in about the mid-2010s, and now in some cases they're back to what they were. Then not all of the taxa are covered fully or certainly in depth in many of the floras and ID guides. I'd say some of the best ID guides are still things like Stace, and so that's the big new flora of the British Isles, and then also John Poland's vegetative key, but there are other specialist guides as well. And then to many people, they all look superficially the same, so it can be a challenge. And then even more challenging, and this is where I come unstuck a lot of the times, there are many cultivars, so cultivated varieties, which are widely planted, which just mucky up that image of what you have of a particular species. So in the Lawson Cypress group, I think there's about 78 different cultivars that you could potentially come across in the wild, and some of them look nothing like the parents. Others can be golden, or they can be grey. They can have thin reduced leaves. It's bizarre sometimes. So I'm just going to roll back a little bit and think about what is the Cypress family, the Cupressaceae, and what that contains. So some books will call it the juniper family, but I tend to call it the Cypress family as that's the bigger group, and certainly internationally. So internationally, we've got things like Nootka Cypress, we've got the Lawson Cypress group, the Chamaecyparis. There's these names which you may not be familiar with, like Hesperocyparis and Platycladus, and we'll talk about some of these later. And finally, you've got times Hesperotropsis, which is your Leylandii group. So that's one batch, and these all have similar features for that group. And there's a second batch within this family, and these are your Japanese red cedars, and then you'll see lots of repetition of the word redwood. So Metasequoia, Sequoia, Sequoiadendron, the giant redwood group. Historically, the Cupressaceae was treated as two families. We had the core Cupressaceae, and it's still considered a subfamily. So the subfamily Cupressoideae, and that contains the really scaly-leaved species that we tend to think of, the Leylandii group. And then you've got the redwoods, which can actually be quite variable. Some of them, like Cryptomeria, can have big claw-like needles. Then Metasequoia and Sequoia sempervirens and Taxodium, they can look rather yew-like. And if you remember, yew is Taxus baccata, so Taxodium means looking like a yew. You can see the old family name for this was either the Sequoiadae or the Taxodiae. So, and then we've got a weird one in Sequoiadendron giganteum, which has very scaly leaves. So firstly, how do we separate those two groups, the core group from the redwood group? And we're really going to be concentrating on the core Cupressaceae tonight. So the core Cupressaceae, they have leaves which are decusate. That's another way of saying that the leaves are opposite, and then they turn. Then you go up the plant and turn through 90 degrees, and you've got another opposite pair of leaves again. So every node, the leaves turn through 90 degrees and sprout again, and so on. So they're opposite or decusate. Occasionally they're in whorls of 3. That would be juniper. And very rarely are they in whorls of 4. That's a genus called Calitris, which apart from in arboretums, you're not going to see in the wild. So if we look at the redwood group, then the leaves are spirally arranged. You can just about see on that image there, the individual needles are coming off, and in this case they look quite flattened as well. They're arranged in 2 ranks, but it's where their bases come from. They're actually spirally arranged. The cones are different as well. So often when I use the word cones, I'm going to be talking about female cones here, but in the core Cupressaceae, the cones are decusate again. So it's taken that pattern and repeated it. We'll look at cone scales later, but they're basically opposite pairs, and then they turn again and they're opposite pairs again. Whereas in the redwoods, they are spirally arranged, and you can see here how it's doing Fibonacci spirals and things like that. And the individual cone scales in the lower example, the redwoods, they often look rather like lips. And I was always taught that giant redwood was Mick Jagger's lips. If you're younger viewers, Kim Kardashian will work. But the smaller species, the sequoias, as opposed to Sequoiadendron, they just have small Mick Jagger lips as well. So you don't get those prominent lip-like structures on the core Cupressaceae. So that's a little bit how to separate the family into the core groups. Then just looking at the nomenclature, we've got here a common names on the left, and Stace, which is the big new flora of the British Isles, which is the industry standard. When I was learning what Lawson Cypress was, and in my horticultural days, it was known as Chamaecyparis lawsoniana. That stayed until about 2015 or so, when the name got changed and it got moved into the genus Cupressus, the cypresses. And then now, if you go back and check on Plants of the World online, you'll find it's been dumped back into Chamaecyparis. And it's the same for many of these. So things like Monterey cypress, I was quite happy calling it a Cupressus macrocarpa. It's now in its new genus, which is Hesperocyparis. I'll talk a little, very briefly about why that's happened and things. And again, Nootka Cypress has had 4 names over that time period as well. So I would actually say sometimes the common names are more stable across a whole suite of floras if you're looking at characters and trying to revise them than actually the scientific names are. And as always, some acts use, to our mind, weird alternative common names than those regularly used in sort of British and Irish floras and things. So I wonder if in the QA box, if you can write, tell me what Port Orford cedar might be, if anyone's got an idea, and also what Alaska cedar or Alaska cypress might be. So see if I can see the results. So if we, you can write in the QA session if you're able. So we've got a somebody's put Alaska is Nootka cypress. That's correct. Somebody's queried is one of them Western hemlock. They're not. Port Orford cypress is a different one. Oh, we've got a different name, Californian cypress as well. So just let a couple more come up if they're coming. So Port Orford cypress is actually Lawson cypress to most of us, but this is the name that is used in commercial timber industry over in North America, and it's Port Orford is where it's first seen. And then somebody said Alaska was the same as Nootka, which is correct. Alaska or cedar, Alaskan cedar even is the same. So yeah. So occasionally be wary of the common names being a little bit different to what you might expect. So how do we go about identifying this group? And in fact, many of the conifers this will apply to. So we could have the habit, so that's the form that the tree takes when it's mature, which I find can be useful, but there's also always the possibility that your tree's been crammed in, it's in a hedge, so you can't see the growth. It's grown in a dense woodland, so it's very tall, or it's an individual. So I tend not to focus too much on habit. What is useful is that leading shoot, the very tip of the tree, does it droop? And that's quite a nice Lawson's character. If it's more erect, then it's more of a Nootka group. And then the individual shoots, are they flattened into sprays or branchlets, or are they sort of more 3D? And we'll see later some examples of that. Then there's difference between foliage features. I'm not going to go through all of these because we'll talk them through. Then there's cones, the size, shape, and these things called protuberances, the sort of swellings that stick out. And then smell. And having taught conifer ID for many years, I find the sense of smell that people have and what they're smelling doesn't always relate to what the books are suggesting. So for me, a lot of the Lawson cypress group are quite heavy, they're quite oily, quite sour smelling, often petrolly or parsley scented, whereas you've got something like Thuja plicata, Western red cedar, that's got a lovely fruity smell. And then many of the Macrocarpa group, the Monterey cypress group, they're quite fruity as well. But that doesn't always, people don't always agree with the sense of smell. So take those with a pinch of salt. So if we look at some of the characters, we've got, like the illustration here that on this slide, you can see the individual shoot that's coming out, the side branchlets, those units, those sprays, are held all in one plane. And if we didn't have those cones, that would press beautifully in between 2 pages of a book. It's already pre-flattened for you. Whereas the other option is you've got an intermediate category, or you get to this last group, the 3D category. And it's a little bit hard to show on a picture, obviously, and we'll see another slide later. But can you see how the side branches are all shooting out, and then the individual branchlets are shooting out at strong angles. So if I was to snap off one of these short Christmas tree-like shoots, it would sit on the desk slightly high, it'd be held up, and it would be quite substantially robust 3D. So scale leaves, we use terms like facial and laterals in the keys, and people like John Poland have introduced the term imbricate. Imbricate just means like shingles or tiles on a roof, so they overlap. So the photo here shows it beautifully, an imbricate leaf, where the facial leaf is overlapping the 2 side ones at the base, and then just overlapping the next facial leaf, and so on. So facial, another word they might use is the top leaf, and that also use words like adaxial and abaxial, but I'm not going to go too much into those. And The actual individual facial leaf might be quite rounded or might have a keel. We'll see examples of these later. So that can be useful. And the lateral leaves, so they're the hair either side. If we're looking from the top, in this case on a specimen, they again could be keeled as in like a boat. So if you fold a piece of paper and then gently unfold it, you've got a ridge down where the fold of the paper is. That would be your keel. The whole shoot then, that's, and I'm just showing two shoots on the slide here. One's an upper, one's a lower, but that doesn't matter for the moment. That whole shoot, does it have distinct lateral and facial leaves? So could you say that the laterals are longer? And I'd say they are in this case, and they're very strongly folded, whereas the facial are a bit more ovate, or so egg-shaped broadly. They are ovate triangular. That gives the leaf a very distinct flat look. And if you were to hold that between your fingers, like imagine holding a pencil now, you could roll a pencil, even if you've got an angled pencil as opposed to a round pencil. If you've got a flat structure, it's not going to roll between your fingers. So some books use the term dimorphic, some keys, and other books use monomorphic. So we've got an example here of, I think it's Mediterranean cypress, Cupressus sempervirens, which has the leaves, the facial and laterals are identical, so there's no clear top and bottom. That means that it's very rounded in this case, or could be slightly square in cross section, so you can actually roll that one. And whilst we're looking at the leaves, look at how the leaves on the Cupressus sempervirens, they're lovely and rounded, so we'd be using words like obtuse, the apex is obtuse, as opposed to the apex being acute in the Nootka cypress on the bigger image. We also have resin glands at present. They can be really useful. So they're the ones that are arrowed in that illustration. You can see on the right-hand image at the top, there's like looks almost like there's a little cleft or a recess which has got the arrow in it. That will be filled with resin. If you rub it or crush the plant, that's where you'll be getting that smell from. And often it's useful to hold up your specimen against the light, so get some light from the back. So hold it up to the sky and look at it, and they can look a bit like stained glass windows. So if you've got a very 3D, like our Cupressus sempervirens needle, then, sorry, not needle, branch, then you'll find that there's less light going to come through as well. So they're not as obvious. And in some species, the resin exudes so much that you're left with little droplets of incrustations of resin. And this is one of the Arizona cypresses. I think it's glabrous Arizona cypress. Sorry, smooth Arizona cypress. And that yeah, has very distinctive glands. This is a kind of species you'll see in gardens or garden centres rather than out in the wild. So then we're also looking at our facial leaves. So looking at the lower image, the Nootka-tensis, you'll see that that facial leaf overlaps and touches the next one. Whereas in the upper one, the Lawson cypress, it doesn't overlap. There's a gap in between, and we have this white X sort of character. And this is often termed a seam. And generally, as long as you don't get too many horticultural variations going on, these white seams, or seams rather, not always white, but they are in Lawson's, is quite a good character to get your Nootka, your Chamaecyparis group. Notice also that the Nootka, the lower image, has keels. You can just see a raised line there. I've arrowed it just to show that there's a bit of a ridge line down there. So again, that's another really useful character. If you do have questions, please use the QA box and put the question in there as well. So if there's anything coming up. A few more terms, less used in this group, in the core Cupressaceae, the Leylandii group, but often used in other conifers, is this word concolorous and discolorous. Concolorous is where the leaves, the top and the bottom, are pretty much the same colour. They're uniform. Or discolorous would be one side might be glossy green and the other side might have a distinct white markings or pattern. So on the right-hand image, the background image is a Lawson cypress that has on both top and bottom has these white X's, or some people call it a butterfly as well, if you want to call it that, the markings. Whereas the Western red cedar on the left two images, you've got a glossy upper surface. So the facial leaves are glossy. You flick it over and you see the underside of the leaf, the abaxial side, that the facial leaves have these two white patches, and then the lateral leaves, the two on the side, have an individual, just the one white patch as well. So that can be very useful to check. If you handle the material a lot or get it wet and then handle it, I often find that these white patches can come off sometimes. So always be a bit cautious. If you're looking at a specimen that's being passed around by a group, they may have rubbed all the patches off. There's also an issue with age. A bit like holly trees, a young holly seedling will be spiky, whereas as it grows older, they will have adult growth. So many of the Cupressaceae exhibit juvenile and adult foliage. This image picture in the background is Western red cedar. You can see the bud, the shoot at the top is incredibly spiky. And I've seen seedlings of Western red cedar that look just like a juniper and just as offensive. Junipers have these acicular needle-like leaves. Acicular means with a little sharp projection on the end. And then as they mature, as they get bigger, the other leaves form the adult leaves. So there's an example there of a nice illustration, somebody's photographed of Western red cedar that looks nothing like a Western red cedar because it's just a few generations, a few months or weeks old even. And example here of Hesperus, what was a Cupressus. There you can see the older spiky juniper-like leaves sticking out along the main stem, and the more mature adult leaves. So as they get older, they become decurrent. That means they grade into the stem, and they also get more pressed, so tight to the stem rather than sticking out. I've not seen this species, or certainly not in the wild rather. You've got the Xanthus oparis vietnamensis, which is one of a very rare species that has both adult and juvenile leaves all mixed together. So if you were to come across that, it would look very odd, but actually quite distinctive. So those are the foliage characters we're going to talk about. If we look at cones, then we have what are called pollen cones or pollen strobili, and they can look incredibly striking en masse. My neighbour has a Lawson cypress, and as I'm walking past with a dog, you just at the right time of year, which is about January, May, you'll see it covered in these lovely bright red, small, or only about 5 millimeters, half a centimeter long, red strobili or cones. And then they soon fade and just go fairly black and eventually drop off. So they're quite short-lived, and typically we don't use them in identification. The exception being if it's flowering, where you've got male cones, then Lawson cypress is red, whereas most of the other species are yellow. So something like Nootka has these bright golden yellow cones. Then we've got female cones or seed strobili. If you want to use it, you'll find books will sit with one or the other. In this case, they're lovely pea-like structures, aren't they? Ball-like structures. So they're much more diagnostic. They're more stable in some ways than some of the vegetative characters that you might find in cultivars. If you go around a garden centre or a nursery where they've got a few trees planted out, you'll find that the forms a leaf take are bizarre. And it's only when you look at the seeds or the cones that you realise, oh, it's probably a saguaro cypress or something like that. So features to consider when you're looking at the cones are what's the overall outline? So the example at the top here is, I would call it a ball, or a globe, a globose, maybe even a square sometimes. But like a square, it's sort of equal in height as width and everything else. Whereas the other option is you've got ellipsoid, which is your Western red cedar group, where all the scales generally are coming from the base, and they're long and tall, and we often find in the books they call them tulip-like. And the size can be important. So if we've got something like Monterey cypress, that's typically the biggest cone of the this group, you'll find they have quite substantial cones all the way down to saguaro cypress, which are only about 5 to 8 millimeters from memory. Other features is these protuberances. You see those sticky out bits on the Nootka cypress at the top. Those are umbos, which is another, sticky out. I need to talk about peltate. So ignoring the Thuja, the bottom right-hand one, both of the two species shown, the Nootka-tensis and the Chamaecyparis, have peltate scales. These are the individual scales that make up that ball, and their edges here only touch each other. Whereas if we look at the Thuja, a lot of their sides will touch and overlap. So if we think about a leaf that's peltate, so a natural plant that would do this would be something like a marsh pennywort or navelwort would have peltate leaves, or if you're a gardener, maybe Nasturtium stropiolum species. Or a mushroom even, that's peltate broadly, if you don't. So it has a stalk and then a disc. They all do that. The stalks all attach to the middle of that sort of ball, and then it's only the edges that are touching. So yeah, there's peltate, there's an example there. And I think your arrow will show on the screen. I'm highlighting a central scale, and then there's a pair either side, and there's a pair either side there. So that again, they're decusate. Useful feature. So let's look at some of the species. So we'll look at the Cypress group rather, and notice now they're all quite distinct names. They're separate from each other, whereas if I did this a few years ago, we'd probably just have talked about Chamaecyparis and Cupressus as the key ones. So I'll let these images load, but what you'll see is a similarity is they've all got these ball-like round globose cones. The middle lower one, a Cupressus, is one of the Mediterranean species. These are slightly rugby ball shaped rather than footballs, but you were getting the same idea. Notice the difference in those protuberances and things like that. Some have really strong prickles like the Nootka, whereas the Chamaecyparis, it's got a little bump on it, but not as obviously. Then if we look at the Thuja group, these are the ones which have a overlapping scales. So you've got weird things like Calicedrus, which look rather like expanded clothes pegs, something like that. And whilst then you've got Platycladus orientalis that some of you might not know by that name. It used to be a Thuja. There's quite a fleshy cone as well, which is a bit unusual. But you can start to see they're sort of paired to each other. And then you've got Thujaopsis, and in the background we've got Thuja. So these have a much more even, regular decusate, so opposite paired scales and character, and the fact they overlap each other as well. Let's just repeat that a bit then. How would we go about separating a Thuja and a Cypress if we came across them? So a Thuja group, which I'm including there, Calicedrus and Thujaopsis. The female cones then would be oblong, ovoid oblong, so taller than they are wide. That's a roughness. The scales are very flattened and very drawn out, so they overlap each other. And the scales also generally are rising quite low down from the base of that cone, the sort of stalk. Whereas the Cypress group, which is everything else, the female cones are globose to subglobose, so that would allow for our rugby ball. We have those peltate scales, where only the outer edges touch, and I think hopefully you can see that on the rugby ball specimen that they've also exploded a bit. And if I could do a cross section of the cone, we'd find that they are cruciform. They're in a cross, literally in a cross, because they're paired scales. They're decusate again. So I'm just going to go through the Cypress group, and hopefully I'll have time to go through the Thuja group and then sum up. So it may be I just pause on some slides, don't talk, and just you can read it yourself. But the Cypress group, they're interesting. They all have a variety of smells, but for me, the Nootka cypress, we're sort of getting oily and parsley smells. The Chamaecyparis are more parsley, petrol-y. But then if any of the Hespero, Cyparis, and Cupressuses, These are more lemony. Now, it's only recently we've started calling the Hesperocyparises that name. These are New World. Hespero means Western, so these are New World cypresses. So they're the Arizona cypress, the smooth Arizona cypress, the Monterey cypress, whereas the true Cupressus, the genus that's been preserved, is the sort of Mediterranean cypress that we get in Europe. So they've purely, well, not quite purely split it on geographical region, but mostly. So looking at Nootka, you can see the synonyms there rather. The foliage, the shoots and the twigs are pendants. They're all in one plane. So if you look at the back illustration, if we take one of those sprays that I keep talking about, we pulled that off, you'd find that that whole unit, I'm hoping my arrows doing, so if I remove that unit, that, and then dropped it on the table, it would just sit perfectly flat. So it's very much in one plane. It has a very, to my sense of smell, a very heavy, quite unpleasant, quite headachy smell, meant to be quite an oily parsley smell. And some people I know do get petrol smell off it. The seeds then, they've got the peltate scales, and they're medium sized. That means they're 8 to 12 millimeters. They've got this thick thorn-like conical protuberance, so quite a substantial unit there. And before they ripen and they split, they've got this grey-green colour, quite a distinctive colour as well. If we look closely, we'll see that the leaves, the individual needles, then are acute to cuminate. They have a keel, which is what's arrowed as well. It's also got the resin glands as well. So both of those are useful features to separate some of the other Lawson cypress group, which can have rounded needles or leaves. Nootka cypress, very common, widely planted, widespread in forestry as well. Then we've got Lawson cypress. This is a great one for walking down your local road. So next week when you're doing a dog walk or going out botanizing, have a look and you'll see that they have a droopy leading shoot. The tip grows up and then the weight of it drops it down. Whereas if we had a Western red cedar group or Western red cedar, it stands erect. Again, you can see the shoots in the background image. They're all in one plane. So the ultimate branchlets, the ultimate units are more or less flat, but they have that droopy look as well because they're so leafy almost, it pulls it down. And then if we flick over the back of the leaf, we've got that distinctive white X. And this one, again, has a strong, oily parsley smell. So much smaller cones this time. So they're only 7 to 9 millimeters. They often get this very wrinkled look, and they look like dried peas to me. And they only have a very short umbo, or that projection, on the peltate scale. And as we've already said, the pollen cones are red, so quite distinctive. But there are lots and lots of cultivars. So the background image is a cultivar called Lutea. There's Vesaliae, there's Silver Queen, Filiformis. You can just see how the foliage varies, and it's often the cultivars that throw me and get me confused. So a little recap how I would separate Lawson's and Nootka cypress, because again, these are two which people get confused. So is there a seam? And you'll see that there is a seam in Lawson's, but there's not in Nootka. That facial leaf overlaps the next facial leaf, so there's no chance for a seam to be prominent. And then are the resin glands obvious or are they obscure? And you'll find certainly if you take a piece of Lawson cypress, hold it up to a bright light, look at it, you'll see there's very obvious church stained glass windows in there. Do the needles, the leaves, are they weakly keeled or are they strongly keeled? In the case of Nootka, you've got the K in Nootka, that'll help you remember it's keeled. And then, yes, you've got the prominent white markings as opposed to not relatively unmarked. So the twigs are very strongly flattened in Lawson's, but weakly four-sided to rounded in Nootka. And if we look at cones, we've got the Nootka pollen cones, so completely different. You wouldn't confuse those. The female cones, though, you can see there's a size difference, 8 to 12, 7 to 9. Okay, it's annoying if you've got a 9mm cone, but how big is that umbo, that protuberance? And it should be quite substantial. Hinoki cypress occasionally gets planted out. Certainly it's one I see in churchyards quite a lot. The leader is erect, so the shoots are erect. They again spread in one plane. This has, the books say, is sweetly resin scented. I would say it's certainly sweet, it's not unpleasant. Sometimes I struggle to find the smell on this. Again, the cones are relatively smaller, 6mm, again, only with a very small protuberance on there. We've got some nice illustrations here. You can see the leaves are typically are very obtuse, so very rounded. So those leaves that were in the background, if I go back, they're quite a lot of those are obtuse, so with a broad angle. And to sometimes they can be acute as well, which not all the books cover. Upper surface is a lovely polished green. The lower surface has white lines. They're just not as distinctive as Lawson cypress. And then the resin glands are harder to see. You really need to look for these a lot more. And again, you've got that seam between the leaves. Saguara. In fact, I'm not going to talk about that one because I'm going to run out of time. So you can have a look at those later. Notice it's got a seam and the pale broad patches. It's really variable. They often have cultivars that retain their juvenile foliage, which can be really confusing. I find it a lot in gardens and churchyards rather than out in the wild. And whereas a juniper is really aggressive and spiky, Saguara cypress has got a softer feel to it. But the commonest species that cultivars that you find is like plumosa or squarosa. So the western cypresses, the Arizona, smooth Arizona, and that's the group, they have very 3D foliage. There's no way that you'll flatten that readily to go in a plant press. You'll really have to push it down. It doesn't sort of sit naturally. In the case of Hesperosaurus glabra, they exude this strong resin as well that leaves white marks. So some that you may come across, but more gardens, more Italianate sort of style gardens. Whereas something like Monterey cypress is common in forestry. So this is where the shoots, I think, are quite chaotic and 3D in their look. We'll see an image in a bit. The leaves are all similar. There's no distinct facial and lateral leaves. They're also quite rounded. I think you can see on the image there that if you took off one of those short green shoots, that it's actually quite even-sided, so you could roll it. And when you've got good material, it smells really, really strongly of citronella, or at least citrusy. And this has one of the larger fruits, not surprising, being macrocarpa, big fruited. They can be 14 to 40mm at times, and they just have a relatively small umbo, or that projection. You can see that little sort of almost trying to be a lip there, isn't it, coming off? So this is what I mean by that chaoticness. If you identify a shoot coming off, maybe the shoot that's sort of about 1 o'clock on the screen, you've got the main stem coming off, and then branches come off and then turn irregularly. And to my botanical eye, they look rather like this plant called samphire. It's not quite the same, but it gives you an idea, it gives that 3D-ness of it. So if I peeled a specimen of this off, a chunk about the size of that samphire, put it on the desk, it's not going to sit flat. So we've seen two of the parents now of Leylandii. So what is Leylandii? Well, Leylandii is Nootka cypress and Monterey cypress, and they were brought to gardens near Welshpool in Wales, mid Wales, and they hybridized there, and it's been selected from there and spread ever since. And they formed this hybrid called Hesperotropsis, which is, you can see it's sort of a combination name of Hesperocyparis and Calitropsis, named after John Leyland, Christopher Leyland, sorry, who was the owner of the house. There are other forms of hybrids with other cypresses. So if we cross Nootka with Arizona cypress, we get Alice Holt cypress. That is a stunning tree. There's a lovely plant again in Welshpool. I don't know why it's not more widely grown. It's a very attractive tree. And then less hardy, there's Hesperocyparis lusitanica, which you'd think is from Portugal, but it's got a bit confused in its naming. It was brought over from into Spain and Portugal from Mexico, and I've never seen that cultivar, that hybrid yet. Doesn't seem to be widely planted either from publications. So we've got Leylandii. We're just going to concentrate on that one. The image in the back there is actually Leylandii. The shoots are a mixture of arranged in 3D, but then when you get down to the individual sprays at the end, they're actually 2D. So like the illustration here, if we took off one of those, let's take the left hand of the big shoot, took off that right spray and put it on our desk, it would lie flat. But notice how the whole form of all of it, as before it's pulled apart, is standing 3D. Look at the shadows on that as well. It's really showing how 3D it is. Then the individual, the smallest sort of shoots that you could get off there, those green tassels, you'll find that they are square to more or less rounded in cross section. That's because the leaves, there are no distinct facial and lateral leaves. So you can roll that between your fingers. The leaves, tail leaves, are also acute, so sharp. And if you hold it up to the light, you will see the resin glands. And they have a strong parsley scent. And actually, you can sometimes, as you walk past the plants, you smell as it exudes. So we've got the seed cone there, and that's an intermediate between the parents in size. Has a bit of a umbo, a triangular umbo. That's coming from the Nootka cypress. So hopefully here you can see that chaoticness that's going on. That's classic Leylandii. I'm not going to talk to that. That's something you can come back and look at. But we'll look at the parents here. So we know one of the parents is Monterey and one is Nootka. So on the left, we've got that chaotic, disorganized 3D-ness. On the right, we've got a very tidy 1D, flattened branches and branchlets. And if you cross it, you get intermediate characters. And it's exactly the same with the cones, that Nootka, fairly substantial cones, 8 to 12 millimeters. They have that prickly, sharp, conical umbo. They have around 4 to 6 scales, so about that size. Then we've got Monterey cypress, is much bigger, 14 to 40, so very weak, low umbo, lots more scales. So we get, in comparison, these are in ratio on the screen. And then the hybrid, which is Leylandii, is intermediate in size and has an intermediate in scales, usually about 8 scales as well. So that very quickly was the Leylandii side. Now we've got the Cypress side. Now we've got the Thuja side. Hopefully we'll have time for all of that. So the Thujas, remember, these have the overlapping scales. So they're often upright and they're not ball-like, they're oval. So we've talked about those. Occasionally you'll get this incredibly flattened species. It looks like not only has somebody, it's flat and it lays flat on a table, but then somebody's put it through an iron and really just flattened it. So really distinctly flat sprays. The leaf tips are incredibly acute as well. You can see they're very sharply pointed. And there's no obvious resin glands, but when you break it and you scratch the wood, it has a very distinct, to me, quite incensey, but a lot of the books talk about shoe polish, and I've tested this on students and they've come to the conclusion that that's quite a good smell. The cones are bizarre. They start out green, like on the right-hand side, with just these little prickles on the end, and then as they dry, they ping open. So they only have 2 fertile scales, and behind each scale there'll be a couple of seeds. So very neat cones. But this, to me, is more of an arboretum or a large garden, National Trust type property. Somebody who's got a bit of interest in conifers than in the wild. I used to know this when I first learnt them as Thuja orientalis, but now it's platycladus, which means flattened branches. So, and it has a very distinct flattened branches as previously, but the odd thing is they're held vertically. So if you see this growing as a small conifer plant in somebody's garden, it sort of looks overall like an almond shape, but all of the branches are pointing upwards. So very distinctive. It also it's concolorous, so both sides of the needles, the leaves are the same, and it doesn't really have any smell that I can tell. It's meant to be slightly resiny, but I've never got any useful smell of it. And then you have these weird cones again. They look like inflated, fleshy Western or Eastern red cedar cones. A student once said it reminded him of those jester's hats everyone seemed to sort of wear in the 90s. Sort of, you can imagine little bells on the end of the scales. Quite common. I see this in churchyards quite a lot when I'm surveying those. Eastern red cedar, less common than Western red cedar, but I think probably overlooked. And as the BSBI Atlas says, it's under-recorded. So the leader is upright, that shoot is upright, not drooping as in Lawson's. The twigs again are held in one plane, they're very flattened. It's got a very sweet aromatic smell, and some books say that it's got stewed apples with a bit of cinnamon in, and it's just like separating types of coffee. If you were just shown all the different colours of coffee, how on earth would you do it? I think it is sweet. I get a bit of pineapple or apple, it depends on the plant. The seed cones are 8 to 12 millimeters. They're a little bit smaller from memory than Western red cedar. And you can see here the needles on the top and the bottom, sorry, the leaves again, that they don't have a distinct white patch. They're slightly paler, and they often have these yellowish lines, and they're slightly glandular as well, which gives those gives the smell. So you can see the stomatal patches, sorry, that's what I'm trying to say, are yellow there, whereas the resin glands are raised as well. That's an unusual feature for separating out Western red cedar. They're sunken in Western, so raised in Eastern. So really common species now. This is probably after Leylandii, I would say is the commonest hedging plant. This time we've got a nice upright leader, so it doesn't droop like Lawson's. Again, twigs and branchlets are all in one plane. Really shiny, dark green on the top, but distinctly coloured on the underside. And then the seed cones, they are quite a bit bigger. They're almost twice as big as Eastern red cedar, Thuja occidentalis. So we've got both sides here. So you can see the upper and lower, that really strong, distinct two-tone look, that discolorous look. And then you've got these prominent butterfly patches, which is arrowed, so the grey areas. And then the resin glands are sunken to only hardly raised, which is a bit vague, but I can see some of the books they're trying to separate that. We have a really reptilian looking species, and the first time I saw this, it just reminded me of crocodile sort of scales. It's really big and coarse, waxy leaves. It looks really like a Western red cedar on steroids. It's really gross and over exaggerated, but very handsome as well, if that's not slightly odd. So the facial leaves are very big. They're up to 40 millimeters, which is 4 centimeters. That's quite big. The laterals are strongly flattened. They're really strongly keeled. And you can see they end up in a little hook on the end. And there's no obvious resin glands, but the underside of the leaves are dramatically white. You only have to flash the sides of the stem, and you suddenly get this white glare coming off. So these stomatal patches. And the seed cones are like chunky, again, steroidal Western red cedars cones, but with a bit of a protuberance on the end, a bit of sort of hooks again. So quite coarse, untidy looking. When it's a young tree, it forms a big sort of enveloping dome. And again, it's quite commonly grown in churchyards. It pretty much anything underneath it will be dead, because it's so dark under there. It's great for building dens, and I've seen kids' dens in churchyards there. So yeah, they're quite leathery to start off with as well. So some resources that people might want to find. There's this excellent book by Mitchell, which is Conifers in the British Isles. It is available to download if you Google it, of course. Conifers in the British Isles, a descriptive handbook. You can get it freely that way. There's the Hillier Manual of Trees and Shrubs. That's incredibly useful for horticultural cultivars and those sort of things, and it is where you start to realize how much messing around and variability there is in the group. I've already mentioned John Poland's Key. The second edition is excellent. The first edition doesn't work too well for conifers. Everything else is excellent about it. Tim Rich and Clive Jeremy, The Plant Crib. That's a really good introduction, good key to conifers again, and you can download that off the BSBI website. Sell and Murrell, they are a bit more of a splitter, but again, it actually works really well. It's another way to get to keys, get to an ID. We've talked about Stace. I would go for the latest Stace version. And then there's Johnson's Collins Tree Guide, which is a really friendly guide, which has really nice illustrations of a lot of horticultural species that you won't come across. Then some excellent online resources. There's Trees and Shrubs Online, which is outstanding. It's got so many photographs of mature trees, close-ups, all of that. So you could be struggling to separate two species. You can really look at their photos there. There's the Gymnosperm database. Again, that's got excellent ID resources. And then a North American university, Oregon State University, have they're a landscape course, I think, but they've got some good guides to how to separate some of the commoner conifers that they have over there. And if you've got the opportunity, go to Bedgebury Pineatum, which is in Kent. It has the national collection of both Chamaecyparis, so the Lawson Cypress and relative plants, and the Western Red Cedar and relative plants there as well. I think they've got cultivars up till 1970, and then they haven't been collating any new ones since then. Any more modern cultivars. If you have specimens, then there's the BSBI referee, Cameron Crook. If you are a BSBI member, you can have access to the referee service. So see the referee at the BSBI website for contact details. But what if I was sent a conifer I would want, and what Cameron wants is ideally a fresh specimen in a bag, but if at most a pressed one. You want shoots and buds, ideally a cone. If there is a flower cone as well, that's useful. And then describe the bark and the crown, and then have a go at working out what the smell is. That can at least sometimes get you away from one or the other group. And then lots and lots of photos of as much as you can find. There's a few training providers who offer conifer ID courses. There's ourselves, Adventist Ecology. There's the Chartered Institute, the Ecologists and Environmental Managers, and the Field Studies Council. They all run courses. And there's a couple more references which which may interest some people, and just some acknowledgements. So I think we're about on time. How's that, James? Do we have any questions?
I'm just opening up the Q&A now. So thank you for the excellent talk. What is the best time of year to go looking at cypresses, etc.?
Now, they're a great group to do in winter because other things have disappeared. They've your sedges that you might be interested in, or your buttercups, whatever, they've just gone, haven't they? So, and you can actually see the forms and really get up close to them and enjoy them. Go and find a nice old cemetery or an arboretum, churchyard near you, and just see what you can see what you can find.
Brilliant, thank you. Nathaniel asks, what does decurrent mean?
Okay, yes, sorry, I probably rushed through that one. Decurrent refers to, it's not just a leaf, but let's talk about a leaf. If you have a leaf attached to the stem, the base of the leaf might actually run down the stem a bit. So a classic example of this would be something like some of the comfreys do that, the symphytums. So
No,
most of
that's good description. And it's, you know, sometimes when you know these things so well, it's so easy to just let a word slip through without a definition. Cone measurement, is that a fully
yes.
open cone or a closed cone?
It's I think there's a bit of variability. Some books are using either or. So yeah, I'm not going to give you a very good answer on that one. I tend to measure what I've got because but you can find old cones on the ground most of the time of the year. Some will retain on the bush, on the plant, but the old cones will obviously be open. So I suspect a lot of the times the measurements on that. But yeah, just be a bit skeptical sometimes of some of the measurements.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah.
When you say the resin glands are raised, do you mean that the gland is on a high point of the leaf, like the keel, or that the gland itself protrudes from the flesh of the leaf?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I've got that slide back up. And if we look at the left hand of the two smaller images, you can see that there's a bit of a keel going on. There's a bit of a raised bit, and then it goes back to my horticulture days. It reminds me of like a scale insect, those little parasites you get on plants. So there's a little raised projection that's quite clear. So in this case, it's both on a keel and it's raised, but it doesn't have to be on a keel. So,
right.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank
That's
you.
confused you.
Excellent. The hybrids and crosses, do those ever emerge spontaneously outside of gardens in your experience, or are those like incredible rarities that are only going to occur really as throwouts from things that have emerged in cultivation?
That's interesting. I haven't personally seen any Leylandii that have self-set, but I do. I have friends who I go and visit to collect plants. He has a load of different Cupressaceae, and he gets a real range of things coming up. And there's a local hill near me where there was just Lawson cypress planted, and there's such a variation in them. So yeah, yeah, I've not knowingly seen that. I noticed a question about red cedars. That word cedar was just used for many different kinds of conifers, so it's a bit vague. It's not as useful as it could be, because we've got Japanese red cedar and things like that, so which is totally unrelated. Well, it's in the same family, but yeah, quite distinct. So
grand. I think, just looking at the time, it's probably about time for us to wrap up there. So thank you, Mark, for that. That has been absolutely fantastic, and it certainly fired me up to go and explore some churchyards and give conifers this group basically a bit more shrift this winter and see what I can find. So thank you for that, and hopefully everyone watching feels the same way. And also that signposting to the identification material, etc. It's always good to know where to get that kind of that guidance and support with that identification. And of course, this webinar is going to be recorded, so everyone can check back and double check their understanding of terminology and look at some of those features as well. So on that front, yeah, thank you ever so much for that, Mark. Thank you again to our funders, DARA, for funding this project and series of webinars. If you've enjoyed this, the recording will go up shortly, but there's going to be at least another 10 webinars